He boarded the plane quietly, wearing headphones too big for his age. Eyes fixed on the floor as he followed the aisle toward first class. Most passengers didn't notice him at all. A few dined. One of them couldn't hide their disgust. What started as a stare quickly turned into something heavier, sharper, more humiliating. In a space built for comfort and privilege, the tension thickened with every passing second. Other passengers shifted in their seats. Some pretended not to see. Some watched, uncomfortable, but silent. The teen stayed still, his face calm, his hands steady, yet something in the air felt wrong. This wasn't just about a seat. It was about who was allowed to belong and who wasn't. Then, without warning, the routine hum of the aircraft changed. The cabin lights dimmed. Movement stopped. The plane didn't taxi. It didn't take off. It froze, and in that moment, everyone realized this flight wasn't going anywhere until the truth came out. The teen had never flown first class before. The ticket wasn't a luxury splurge or a lucky upgrade, it was intentional. His mother had booked it weeks earlier, believing that comfort might ease his nerves before what waited on the other side of the flight. He was young, but his shoulders carried more weight than most people noticed. Responsibility had matured him early, forcing calm where anxiety lived. Airports had always felt overwhelming to him. Too loud, too rushed, too many eyes. Still, he moved through security with quiet discipline, doing everything right. Double-checking his boarding pass, keeping his head low. When he reached the gate and heard his group called for first-class boarding, a few heads turned. The looks were subtle, but familiar quick glances that lingered a second too long. Inside the cabin, first class felt like another world. Wider seats, softer lighting, a sense of entitlement hanging in the air. He followed the numbers carefully, stopping at his assigned seat by the window. He placed his backpack beneath the seat, sat upright, and waited. No rush, no mistakes. Just quiet patience. Around him, other passengers settled in with practiced ease. Some barely noticed him. Others didn't question his presence without saying a word. He could feel it. He always could. Years of being watched differently had sharpened that instinct. Still, he kept his expression neutral, eyes forward, breathing steady. What no one knew was why this flight mattered so much. This trip wasn't just travel, it was a turning point, a chance, a moment that could change everything he had worked for. He had earned his seat, every inch of it, through long nights' sacrifice and discipline far beyond his years. As the cabin doors closed and the crew prepared for departure, the plane felt sealed off from the outside world. 30,000 feet above the ground, there would be no escaping what happened next. And sitting quietly in first class, the teen had no idea that this flight would expose something far bigger than him, something the entire cabin would soon be forced to confront. The tension didn't arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, settling between the seats like an unspoken accusation. The teen felt it before he understood it, the subtle shift in the cabin's energy. The way movement around him became deliberate, measured, watchful. He kept his posture straight, eyes forward, pretending the weight of attention didn't press against his chest. A nearby passenger leaned back, then forward again, their discomfort impossible to hide. The teen sensed it without looking. He had learned long ago that awareness was a form of protection. Drawing attention could invite trouble. Silence, he believed, might help him disappear. But in spaces like this, silence often did the opposite. Minutes passed. Overhead bins closed. The hum of the aircraft grew steadier. Yet the atmosphere in first class felt unsettled, like something unresolved lingered in the air. The teen adjusted his headphones, not playing music, just using them as a shield. He stared out the window, watching the ground crew move below, unaware that his presence had already become the center of quiet resentment. The looks intensified. Not loud, not obvious. Just enough to be felt. A slow scan of his clothes. A pause that lasted too long. The kind of scrutiny that wasn't about curiosity, but judgment. He shifted slightly in his seat, making sure his boarding pass was visible in the seat pocket, as if proof might matter. As if proof had ever been enough. Across the aisle, unease spread. Some passengers noticed the tension but chose comfort over confrontation. Others watched with interest, their expressions unreadable. No one intervened. No one questioned why a teenager, sitting calmly in his assigned seat, could cause so much disruption without saying a single word. The teen's thoughts raced quietly. He wondered if he had misunderstood the seat number. If a mistake had been made, if someone would ask him to move, his heart beat faster, but his face stayed composed. He reminded himself why he was here. He reminded himself that he belonged no matter how many times. The world tried to convince him otherwise. Then the scrutiny hardened into something sharper. The air felt tighter, heavier. A line had been crossed, not visibly, not loudly, but unmistakably. The teen felt smaller in his seat, even though he hadn't moved. His shoulders stiffened, bracing for an outcome he'd seen before in other places, other situations. A quiet escalation that always seemed to end the same way. The aircraft doors were sealed now, the outside world cut off. The cabin lights glowed softly, betraying no hint of the discomfort spreading through first class. Flight attendants moved through the aisle, unaware, choosing not to notice the imbalance forming just beneath the surface. The teen swallowed, steadying his breath. He focused on control, on staying calm, on surviving the moment. Then everything paused. The engines didn't roar louder. The plane didn't begin to move. Instead, there was a deliberate stillness. A pause so unnatural it demanded attention. The ambient sounds faded, replaced by a quiet that forced every passenger to look up. The teen felt it immediately, the shift from private tension to collective awareness. The cabin lights dimmed slightly. Seatbelt signs remained on. The usual progression toward takeoff stopped cold. A ripple of confusion passed through the rows. Heads turned. Movements slowed. Whatever had been simmering in silence was no longer contained. The teen's chest tightened. His first instinct was fear, not because he had done anything wrong, but because moments like this rarely ended gently for people like him. He remained seated, hands visible, posture unchanged. Years of caution guided every movement. Stillness felt safer than reaction. Around him, first class was no longer a sanctuary of comfort. It had become a stage, a confined space where assumptions, bias, and entitlement could no longer hide behind polite smiles. The passengers who had watched quietly now realized they were part of something unfolding, whether they wanted to be or not. The teen stared ahead, heart pounding, mind racing. He didn't know why the plane had stopped. He didn't know what would happen next. But he knew this moment mattered. Not just for him, but for everyone watching. Because whatever came next would force the truth into the open. And once that truth surfaced, there would be no pretending it had never been there. The stillness inside the cabin felt heavier than turbulence. Every second stretched longer than it should have, as if the plane itself was holding its breath. The teen sat frozen in place, not by fear alone, but by awareness. This was the moment where everything could tilt in either direction. The kind of moment that decided how a story would be remembered. Movement finally returned, but not the kind anyone expected. Not the forward push of takeoff. Not the reassuring rhythm of flight. Instead, a controlled interruption rippled through first class. The routines of travel were suspended, replaced by something deliberate and unmistakable. Attention narrowed. Focus sharpened. The invisible line that had been crossed was now being examined. The teen felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with visibility. It was the exposure of being judged without evidence, questioned without cause. His pulse raced, yet his body remained composed. He knew that calm was his only shield. Panic could be misread. Resistance could be rewritten. Stillness was survival. Around him, passengers shifted uncomfortably. What had once felt like quiet agreement now felt like collective unease. The reality they had avoided was no longer optional. Eyes that had judged him moments earlier now looked away, uncertain. Others stared openly, realizing too late that silence had placed them on a side they hadn't chosen consciously, but had chosen nonetheless. The weight of authority entered the space without spectacle. No raised voices. No chaos. Just presence. The kind that forced honesty without demanding it. The cabin no longer belonged to entitlement or assumptions. It belonged to facts, to process, to accountability. The teen felt his chest tighten as attention centered on him, not as a threat, but as a question waiting to be answered. He didn't defend himself. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. His boarding pass, his composure, his very existence in that seat spoke louder than anything else could. The truth had been there from the beginning. It had simply been ignored. Then the shift happened. The energy changed direction. What had been aimed at the teen began to turn outward. The scrutiny reversed. The certainty that had fueled humiliation started to crack. Confidence faltered. Assumptions unraveled under their own weight. The imbalance that had defined the moment finally collapsed. The teen noticed it. In the smallest ways, the way eyes no longer lingered on him. The way tension released from his shoulders. The way the cabin seemed to recenter itself. For the first time since boarding, he felt space to breathe. Not because the injustice had vanished, but because it had been confronted. This wasn't just about a paused flight. It was about a reckoning that could no longer be delayed. In that suspended moment, surrounded by strangers and sealed inside a metal tube miles above the ground, the truth stood unmistakably clear, and as the plane remained frozen, one thing became undeniable. What had started as quiet humiliation had turned into a public awakening, and nothing would return to normal after this. The plane eventually moved again, but something inside the cabin had permanently shifted. What had been paused wasn't just a flight eye, was a belief system that many passengers had carried without ever questioning. As the engines finally roared to life, the atmosphere felt quieter, heavier, reflective, the kind of silence that follows realization. The teen remained in his seat, unchanged in posture, but altered in experience. He hadn't spoken. He hadn't needed to. His presence alone had forced an entire cabin to confront an uncomfortable truth, that dignity does not need permission, and belonging is not granted by appearance or age. For the first time on that flight, he felt seen not as an assumption, as a human being. Around him, eyes no longer carried entitlement. They carried awareness. Some passengers looked away, burdened by recognition. Others stared forward, replaying the moment in their minds. No one could claim ignorance anymore. What had unfolded was impossible to dismiss as misunderstanding or coincidence. It was a mirror held up without warning, as the plane climbed higher. The teen thought about how often moments like this happened without witnesses. How many times similar humiliations went unchecked in grocery stores, classrooms, sidewalks, and public spaces. This time had been different only because the silence had been interrupted. Because accountability had arrived before damage turned irreversible. By the time the flight reached cruising altitude, the cabin had settled into routine, again, but the impact lingered. A quiet lesson had been delivered without speeches or punishment. The kind that stays long after landing. The kind that follows people home. For the teen, the journey ahead still mattered. The opportunity waiting for him still carried weight. But now, he carried something else too, proof that standing still, staying calm and existing with dignity could be powerful enough to stop an entire system in its tracks. This wasn't just a story about a flight delayed. It was a reminder of how easily bias hides behind comfort, and how quickly it can be exposed when truth is allowed to surface. The question is not whether moments like this will happen again. They will. The real question is next time. Who will have the courage to stop everything and look the truth in the eye?